Hi, I'm Rebecca, I'm the psych coach, and today I'm going to be talking about coping with a parent who is narcissistic, or at the very least exhibits narcissistic traits. Having a parent who's narcissistic can lead to many negative experiences like anger, feeling uncared for, and often having a really strong desire to seek their approval, even when you know it's not the most sensible thing to be doing. The emotional neglect can feel intense, and the hope of this video is to empower you to put into place strategies that will help protect you a little bit and stop you from engaging in an often negative cycle that can leave you feeling pretty down, deflated, uncared for, and frustrated. Tip number 1 is to try to not seek their approval. That is really hard. I don't mean deliberately be antagonistic, because typically that will inflame the situation in a number of situations. But what I do mean is trying hard to not constantly want them to recognise that you've done well, to think you've done well at something, or to think that you deserve some congratulations. It might sound obvious, and a lot of people will initially say, I don't care what my parent thinks. I don't look for their approval. But if you dig deeper, it's not uncommon for those childhood traits of wanting to be approved of by a parent or main carer to still be present, even if you don't realise it. It could be things like avoiding saying things because you know they're going to disapprove of it, or because you know they're going to get really angry about it. Now, of course, if you're going to avoid saying something because you don't want to make them angry, it's understandable. You don't want to inflame the situation. But in that, there are potentially some things that you're not saying purely because the basis of it is you don't want them to disagree or think that you're doing something wrong. So try and challenge that. Try and stop yourself from doing that as much, because it's empowering when you can be freed of the weight of trying to get their approval. Tip number 2 is to recognise that their behaviour is part of them and it is nothing to do with you. It's easier said than done, and it's certainly really tricky the younger you are to do that. But if your parent has got narcissistic traits, or indeed is a narcissist, that's part of their personality. That's how they are. And their behaviour towards you isn't indicative of you doing something wrong. It's indicative of their personality. So try and separate the two. Their behaviour doesn't mean that there's somehow a failing on your part or that you've done something wrong. It can be really liberating to see the parent's behaviour in the context of who they are, i.e. a narcissist, instead of seeing their behaviour as just a parent who's talking to a child who just isn't doing the right thing ever and is really being bad and needs to be spoken to badly. They're two totally separate things. And when you can view the behaviour more clinically, it helps you take a step back from it. It takes away some of the power. I describe it rather like looking through a window at your parents' behaviour. There's a pane of glass there. You can see it. It's still unpleasant, but you're observing it. You're not part of that cycle. And it's certainly not a reflection on you having done something wrong. Tip number 3 is to try not to be intimidated by your parents' behaviour. Typically, unhealthy behaviour will be things like coercion, manipulation, could actually be downright abusive. And it can be easy to sort of fall into the cycle of going along with that behaviour, maybe tolerating behaviour that you wouldn't normally from other people. Maybe it means that you would feel guilty and go along with what your parent wants because the weight of the guilt that they're putting on you just feels too much to bear. But the reality is, you don't need to bear that. You need to see their behaviour in the context of who they are. If they're behaving in a manipulative way, that's part of the personality of them. And it's not something that you should partake in, or as much as possible not partake in. It's easy to say to not feel intimidated by it, and typically our experiences as children become an ingrained way of thinking. So it's not uncommon if you've had quite a manipulative parent as you've been growing up, and you felt quite anxious and felt as if you're walking on eggshells around them as a child, for you to still have that hangover effect as an adult, even though you're not a child anymore. So seeing the behaviour for what it is, and reminding yourself, I'm now an adult in this situation. I see this behaviour for what it is. I'm not going to be intimidated by it like I was when I was 5, 10, 15, is an important thought process to hold on to, and one that can be empowering if you are in the face of being manipulated or being shouted at or anything else that your narcissistic parent is throwing at you. Tip number 4 is to push back on unwanted behaviours. Now, I don't mean every behaviour, because some battles aren't worth picking, are they? I'm sure you know that, but some are. If your parent is behaving in an abusive way, if they're behaving in a way you wouldn't tolerate from other people, it can be really empowering to say, I don't want to be around that. It can also feel really scary to be saying that, because think about you as a child. I can't imagine you would have ever said that to your parent as a child, but what's it like saying it as an adult? I don't want to be around that behaviour. I don't want to be spoken to like that. I feel really hurt when you behave like that. Whatever it is that means you're pushing back on the behaviour and indeed following through with the consequences is a different dynamic in your relationship. It's giving out a message of, I don't want to tolerate this anymore. And sure, it's not going to change your parent overnight, but there is something incredibly liberating about saying, I won't tolerate this behaviour anymore. If you speak to me like this, I am going to leave. If you talk to me like this on the phone, I will hang up. There are consequences and there are boundaries, and it's really important that as an adult you're able to start pushing back on some of the boundaries that perhaps weren't adhered to when you were younger. And tip number 5 is to be aware of the cycle. What I mean by that is, if you've got a parent who's a narcissist, who is incredibly difficult, who's quite toxic, often a cycle will take place, which is where they may behave really badly towards you and you get really upset and angry and you think, I never want to be in their company again. I never want to do anything kind for them. I never want to see them again. And you're really read up by that. And that feeling could last a day, it could last a week, it could last a month, it could last years. But then something happens and you soften. Maybe they behave in a different way and you think, oh, maybe they're changed. And so you enter back into what seems like a more healthy relationship with them, where you think, actually, maybe they're not as bad. And the sort of the memories of how badly they treated you and how badly they last spoke to you sort of disappear. You soften, they're pleasant to be around, at least for a little bit. And then suddenly they do something that re-triggers you and you're back to thinking, this is terrible. I can't believe I fell for it the last time. I'm enraged by how they're talking to me. Nothing's changed. They're the same. And so the cycle continues. And part of having a narcissistic parent can be incredibly frustrating to constantly enter into that cycle. And that cycle is the nature of having a parent that is like that. Some people completely break away from the cycles, but that is a small number of people. What I would say is, if you're in the cycle, notice that you're in the cycle, notice which stage you are in the cycle, and notice when it's bad, the chances are it will probably enter into being good again. And when it's good, it will probably enter into being bad again. But knowing that that cycle takes place can help you to break away a little bit, and for you to think, or for you rather to not get so comfortable when it's good, and potentially to not be so enraged when it's bad, but for you to see it as just part of your parents' drama. And of course, you can act according to what you feel like. If you soften towards them and you want to sort of hang out with them more, great. But hold on into your mind that they're not going to have had a personality change. The unhealthy behaviour will still surface. And when it does, you will walk away from it for however long you need to. And the cycle will continue. But knowing that that is part of the cycle and not berating yourself for being in that cycle and being sort of coerced into getting back into it can reinforce a bit of self-acceptance for yourself, because sometimes people will really beat themselves up about sort of fooling for it again or getting back into the cycle. It's part and parcel of having a narcissistic parent, but you can rein in the cycle by knowing what's coming and, if you want to, pulling away from it. If you've enjoyed today's tips, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and I will give you plenty more tips on how you can use psychology in your day-to-day life and to manage relationships.